Hi, guys. So, what I want to talk about today, I want to talk about how fiction intersects with real life. Now, usually when you see people talking about it, talking about things like how science fiction inspires people to become scientists. And that's great. It's something I take kind of seriously when I'm writing. Someone might want to become a scientist or an engineer or a pirate captain or whatever based on something that I wrote. If we're not talking about that, we're usually talking about how we're talking about social issues. Racism has been coming up a lot in science fiction recently. But if you go back far enough, it's always been a theme in science fiction. You can remember even some early Jules Verne stories covering racism. That's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what we actually talk about in conversations with our friends. What was going on in your life when you watched, say, Star Trek II the first time, or The Fifth Element, or whatever? How do these connect with your life? How do they imprint themselves on you? These works, wonderful works of fiction. How do they really become a part of you? Before we go any further, make sure to click like and subscribe. That way you'll get to see more content like this. Also, to help other people find this content. You can also join my Patreon. There'll be links down below. And a reminder at the end of the video. For now, enjoy the rest of the video. So I'm going to tell a couple of stories here. I want to talk about Titanic. Now, when Titanic came out, I was in my first marriage at the very beginning. And the way we were managing things, we didn't have any kids, it was just me and her. This was back when you could actually work a fast food job and support yourself. We were both working fast food jobs, and so we were living pretty well. About once a week, we would go out. We had a date night every week. And it was fun. And that's when Titanic came out. You might recall Titanic's this really wonderful love story. If you think it's a really wonderful love story, I thought the love story was kind of weak, to be honest. But I really enjoyed the sinking part. The last half of the movie, I really enjoyed that part. I had no idea because we were watching a lot of TV at the time, so I had no idea what to expect. We went to the movie theater and we're like, oh, Titanic, that sounds interesting. Bought a ticket, went in, theater was full. They had moved in some extra benches. We were able to find a seat way at the back, and we sat down and watched this movie, and we were just blown away. Because of some things that were happening in the relationship at the time, you might be thinking this is going to end with me saying, now I love watching Titanic because it reminds me of when that marriage was good. That's not exactly how that went. I don't have a lot of problems watching Titanic, but we did love it so much, we went and watched it a second time. And that's the only movie where, as an adult, I went back to the theater to watch it a second time. I loved The Fifth Element. I didn't go back to that one a second time. I watched it, 100 times since then on DVD and, streaming services and what have you. We also saw in the movie theater around the same time, within a couple of months, probably. So whenever people want to talk about Titanic, I always talk about what was going on in my life at the time. But there are some movies I don't really do that with. So if you read any of my writing, one thing you might have picked up on was that the big trauma in my childhood was my dad having cancer. Now, I'm not going to tell my dad's cancer story. That's his to tell. Fortunately, he passed away back in 2010. He's not around to tell the story anymore. But I can tell my story of being the kid with the dad who had cancer. I'm not going to tell that whole story right now either. I'm going to tell the beginning and the end. For us as a family, my mom, my sister, my two brothers, and me, Star Trek II came out right at the beginning of all of this. And so we saw that in the theater. Me and my two brothers, we saw it in the theater. My sister was somewhere else. I'm sure she saw it in the theater. I don't know about my parents. I think it had to come out on VHS before they had a chance to see it. While Dad was sick, Star Trek 3 came out. When he was finally recovering, Star Trek 4 came out. And if you follow the story arc in these movies, Star Trek 2, of course, is the one where Spock dies. Sorry, spoiler. Star Trek 3 is the one where they bring him back to life. Oh, sorry, spoiler again. And Star Trek 4 is the one where they come home and they have to take a little detour and save the world. And there's some cool time travel and so forth. All right, so those three movies represent a trilogy in the Star Trek universe. They also represent that specific period of time where my dad was sick that we all went through as a family. And each one of them connects. Dad going into remission right around when Star Trek 3 came out. Going back to work right around when Star Trek 4 was coming out. And so it may surprise you, I didn't grow up a Trekkie, but all of this was there. Star Trek The Next Generation came out the first year my dad was back to work after the cancer. So we would sit down and watch The Next Generation together as a family because we finally could, watch something as a family. But getting a little more personal. So back at the beginning of all of this, of course, we saw Star Trek 2 in the theater. Then we went to my dad's hotel room. Story, he was TDY in Ohio. I don't know. I think he was working on the Stargate. I don't know why I'd be in Ohio, but that's what I think was happening. It was Air Force. Air Force had the Stargate. So anyway, there were these 2 nights in a row. The first night we went to the hotel. My brother went in the room and they talked and hung out all night. And then the second night I went into the room and talked to my dad and we hung out all night. And that's when he told me he was sick. The doctors didn't know what was wrong with him and he didn't know if he was going to make it. Right around the same time, right there on cable, the movie Silver Streak was coming on. So dad was like, how are you feeling about it? And I was like, I don't know, 8 or 9 or something. And I was like, oh no, Dad, you're going to make it. It's no problem. Because I was a little kid. What I know. He did make it, by the way. That's part of the story. Then we laid down and we were Silver Streak together. So now all these years later, whenever I watch Silver Streak, and this has become especially important since he did pass away in 2010, time's sake, this is all early 80s. Star Trek 2 had just come out, was in the theaters. It was that time. So when Dad did finally pass away afterwards, whenever I watch Silver Streak, I feel closer to him. I feel like he's here with me. And if you've seen Silver Streak, it's not that kind of movie. It's Gene Wilder, Richard Pryor. It's a ridiculous comedy about the what's-his-face papers, the painter. My dad was really into him. He had a coffee book table with a bunch of his works in it. I can't remember his name. Starts with an R. And Gene Wilder keeps getting kicked off the train and finding his way back on. And there's a sequence where Richard Pryor puts blackface on Gene Wilder so he can try to pass as black to try to get past the cops. He fails because he's white. And then a chase ensues. And it's not even one of their better comedies together. It's a good movie. I would recommend it. But obviously it's a movie I watch every now and then, no matter how good it is or isn't, because it became part of my life. It's an important part of my story. Then at the end of it, Dad went back to work. He was cancer-free. They took the thing out of his chest and all that, and he's back to work. And we're sitting there one day, and my dad said, there's a movie coming up on HBO again. It's always HBO, apparently. He wanted to watch it, and he wanted to know if I wanted to watch it. Was I doing anything? It was like Saturday afternoon. I was like, no, I got nothing going on. What is it? The Ice Pirates. So we sat down and watched it, and it was great. Dad and I sat down to watch Silver Streak at the beginning of this mess, and when it was all over, we sat down and watched the Ice Pirates, and it was kind of like a victory lap. Here I come, Dad! And so now when I watch the Ice Pirates, I think of Dad. When I was doing the Ice Pirates video, I had a hard time not talking about my dad in that video because it didn't belong in that video. It belonged in this one. And the Ice Pirates is a ridiculous comedy. I mean, those contraptions, cutting off people's nuts, it's just ridiculous. But, there's a scene, and I remember Dad was sitting there, and Jason says to, the other guy says, I don't mean anything by it, but is there any reason you painted him black? And the guy says, well, yeah, I wanted him to be perfect. And every time I watch it, I hear my dad chuckling. The space herpes joke, and Dad's like, what the hell? And so that movie has become a part of me. And I did mention in that video that it has significantly influenced my writing. Silver Streak has too, actually. One thing that both movies taught me was commit to the bit. If you're going to do a little comedy scene, commit to it. Do the whole scene. A lot of comedies start to fall down. You saw this in later episodes of Psych. In earlier episodes, they would commit to the bit. In later episodes, they would just rapid fire the bit and move on because they had too much story to tell. And you're starting to see that in a lot of comedies. Like if you go back and watch, say, Ghostbusters, and you remove all of the comedy, there's not a lot of story left. It's a pretty basic story. Good comedies are like that. And Ghostbusters is one of those movies that imprinted on me too. Yeah, I was young when it came out, memorized the whole movie. Same thing with Back to the Future and basically every Star Trek movie and Star Wars. Well, I want to say Return of the Jedi came out while Dad was sick. But the other 2 movies were before that. So Return of the Jedi was kind of a letdown. I mean, come on, you put all these Care Bears in the movie. Of course it's a letdown. So when you're sitting with your friends or your family or whatever, and you're talking about, different movies or shows you watched or books that you read, pay a little attention and see how often you talk about what was going on in your life when you read it. Because I remember when I read the Belgariad, that was back in, yes, I used to read heroic fantasy. I would say I was in early high school when I read that, freshman year maybe. I might have been in the 8th grade. And it was a wonderful escapist kind of story. I didn't finish reading The Malorian until I was an adult, mostly because I don't think the last books came out until I was an adult. The Chronicles of Amber I read in 7th or 8th grade. And then when I was in high school, the second sequence, the Merlin sequence was coming out. And I read those as they came out. And that has profoundly affected me. Because you see, later in high school, I finally started getting over the first huge wave of depression that dates all the way back to Dad being sick. And it's works like the Belgariad and the Chronicles of Amber, and then a whole lot of heavy metal music is what helped me finally get out of that. So these stories, they're not just stories about people we don't know, about people who don't exist, about technology that we're just imagining. They're not just that. They don't just inspire us to become doctors and scientists and engineers and lawyers and whatever. They show us how to be better versions of ourselves. And they help us deal with the tough times. They help us celebrate the good times. They're not just stories. Thank you for watching the video. If you made it this far, you definitely need to like and subscribe. Ring the bell if you want to get notifications. And don't forget to join my Patreon. At some point, when people join my Patreon, this wall is going to be filled with names. Obviously, there aren't any right now. YouTube might be suggesting some videos here for you to watch. You could also do that. Have a nice day.